All right, so have you ever thought about, like, what it really means to live your best life?
Mm.
Like, what if that meant trading monk robes for a millionaire's lifestyle? Would that be a spiritual upgrade or a downgrade?
That is a really good question. It gets right at how we view spirituality and material success.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to be exploring today. A figure who kind of embodies this interesting tension, Chris Butler,
Okay.
also known as Siddhaswarupananda Dasa.
So we're deep diving into a story about somebody who seemingly went from monk to mogul.
Yeah,
Interesting.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So Siddhasvarupananda comes from the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition of Hinduism,
Okay.
which is centered around devotion to Krishna. And within that tradition, he was a sannyasin,
Okay.
a renunciate who's supposed to be detached from worldly possessions,
Right.
yet he also became incredibly wealthy.
Okay, so to understand, like, what makes this story so fascinating,
Yeah.
we need to understand, like, what sannyasa actually means.
Right, exactly. So sannyasa is a stage of life in Hinduism focused on achieving spiritual liberation. It's a deep commitment to seeking enlightenment. And to do that, sannyasins renounce worldly possessions and attachments.
So it's more than just being a monk.
Yeah.
It's like a complete life change.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, there are 4 levels of sannyasa, each representing a deeper level of renunciation and spiritual realization.
So kind of like leveling up in a video game.
Oh, I like that analogy. The highest level is called Paramahamsa.
Okay.
Think of it as achieving black belt status in spirituality.
Wow.
Paramahamsas are believed to have transcended all these worldly desires and achieved a profound state of enlightenment.
So that's the goal. Like, if you enter into sannyasa, is that the ultimate goal?
Yeah.
To become Paramahamsa.
You could say that,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Now, the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, where Siddhasvarupananda comes from, emphasizes devotion to Krishna
Right.
as the main path to reach that goal.
Okay, so we've got this idea of, like, renouncing the material world, focusing on spiritual growth. But then we have Siddhasvarupananda, a sannyasin who also became a wealthy businessman.
Right.
How does that work?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? So Chris Butler joined the Hare Krishna movement, part of that Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition back in the 1970s, taking the name Siddhasvarupananda Dasa.
Okay.
And he quickly rose within the ranks. But something interesting is that he came in with a group of followers and what was considered at the time a large donation.
So he already had some influence before even entering the movement.
It seems that way. And later he formed his own organization, the Science of Identity Foundation, or SIF.
Okay.
And this is where things start to get even more interesting.
Because this is when the business part really comes in.
While maintaining his status and titles as a renunciate. That's what we'll get into next.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
So before we were talking about Siddhasvarupananda's organization, SIF, and how that's where his business activities really kind of ramped up.
Right. So within SIF, Siddhasvarupananda became connected to a lot of different business ventures.
Okay.
And one of the most prominent was his link to individuals involved with QNet.
QNet. Oh, I've heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a multi-level marketing company, right?
Yes. And it's a company that has faced some legal scrutiny and controversy all over the world. Some people accuse it of being a pyramid scheme.
Okay, so red flags already.
Yeah.
How is Siddhasvarupananda, a sannyasin, supposedly detached from all this material wealth involved in something like that?
Well, a key figure in all this is a man named Joseph Bismarck, known as Japadas, within Siddhasvarupananda's circle.
Okay.
He was a follower of Siddhasvarupananda, and he became a leader in QNet.
So you have a sannyasin leading a controversial MLM.
Right. It definitely raises some questions about whether these ideals of sannyasa, with its focus on renunciation, are compatible with participating in or benefiting from a business model that's been criticized as potentially exploitative.
Yeah. Interesting how Siddhasvarupananda, like, while he was leading this organization, he still retained all those titles and trappings of a renunciate.
Right.
How do those two things go together?
Well, that's the paradox, isn't it? At the heart of the story, it's important to note that Siddhasvarupananda has denied any wrongdoing related to QNet.
Okay.
But former SEF members have kind of painted a different picture.
Oh, really?
What have they said?
They allege a disconnect between Siddhasvarupananda's teachings and what was actually happening within SIF. Some have said they felt pressure to recruit for QNet for both spiritual and financial reasons.
So, like, the lines between spiritual seeking and business ambition got really blurred.
It seems that way. Yeah. And that wasn't the only controversy around Siddhasvarupananda.
Really? What else?
Well, he also faced allegations of controlling behavior within SIF.
Like, what kind of behavior are we talking about?
Well, former members have described strict rules about things like diet, dress, social interactions. Even pressure to cut ties with family and friends outside of SIF. They talk about this feeling of dependence on Siddhaswarupananda and his inner circle.
So more than just adopting a set of beliefs, it was like surrendering your autonomy to this group.
That's how a lot of former members describe it.
And did that sense of dependence extend to finances as well?
Some former members allege they felt pressure to donate large sums of money to SIF, and that there was a lack of transparency about how that money was used.
So this is really heavy. And all of this is happening while Siddhasvarupananda is presenting himself as a renunciate, a spiritual leader detached from worldly possessions.
Exactly. And it really challenges our assumptions about spirituality and leadership. Can somebody really embody these ideals of sannyasa, of renouncing material wealth, while also amassing it and potentially benefiting from the business activities of their followers?
Yeah, it's a really complicated question.
It is.
And there's another layer to this story that we need to get into, Tulsi Gabbard.
Right. The former U.S. Congresswoman.
Yeah.
Her connection to Siddhaswarupananda and SIF adds a really interesting dimension to this whole thing.
I want to hear it. Tell me.
So Tulsi Gabbard had a really prominent political career, but a lot of people don't know that she was raised in SIF.
Wait, really? She grew up in this organization that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
With all of the complexities and controversies.
She did. And even after achieving national recognition, Gabbard continued to acknowledge her connection to SIF and its teachings.
Wow. That's significant. Does she still consider herself a follower of Siddhasvarupananda?
She has spoken about her upbringing in SIF and how it shaped her spiritual beliefs. She hasn't really addressed the specific allegations against Siddhasvarupananda or the organization.
So we have this prominent politician raised in this organization, which potentially lends it some legitimacy.
Yeah.
At the same time, former members are raising these serious concerns about its practices. There's a lot to unpack.
It is, and it really highlights how complex this story is.
Yeah.
You have different narratives, different perspectives. It's up to each of us to look at those and make our own conclusions.
It's also a reminder that we can't take things at face value. Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper to really understand what's going on.
For sure, especially when it comes to organizations and individuals in positions of power and influence.
We need to be critical thinkers.
Absolutely.
Not just accepting what we're told.
That's exactly what we're trying to do here. Provide our listeners with the information and the context to think critically about Siddhasvarupananda and Siddhasvarupa.
Exactly. So let's keep going with this deep dive.
Yeah.
Explore some of the specific allegations that have been made against SEF. What are some of the things that former members have reported?
One of the most serious allegations concerns physical punishments that were allegedly used within SIF, particularly at its boarding schools.
Boarding schools?
Right.
I didn't realize SIF ran boarding schools.
They do. They've operated schools in various locations, including the Philippines, where coincidentally Tulsi Gabbard spent some of her childhood.
So these were schools specifically for children of SIF members?
Yes. And former students have described them as a really strict and sometimes harsh environment.
What kind of punishments are we talking about?
There have been accounts of beatings, forced labor, and other forms of physical discipline.
Oh, wow. That's really disturbing. And these allegations have been made by multiple people.
Yes. These accounts have come from several former students over the years.
This is definitely painting a much darker picture of SIF than maybe what we might have initially assumed.
It is. And it's important to remember that these are allegations, but they are serious allegations that have been made repeatedly.
So how has Siddhasvarupananda responded to these accusations? Has he ever addressed them directly?
He has consistently denied any wrongdoing and has maintained that his teachings are all about love, compassion, and personal responsibility.
But that seems like at odds with what some former members have experienced.
It does, and that's what makes this so difficult to figure out. You know, we have these conflicting narratives, and it's hard to know what to make of them.
Right. We're not here to judge or say who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
But we want to explore all sides
Yeah.
and present as much information as possible.
Exactly. And I think it's important for listeners to understand that even within spiritual organizations, there can be a dark side.
Yeah. It's a tough reality to face.
It is.
But it's important to acknowledge it.
It is. And it's a reminder that we need to be discerning, ask questions, and hold our leaders accountable, no matter how inspiring they may seem.
So with all that said, where do we go from here? What are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive into the world of Siddhasvarupananda and SUF?
I think one of the most important takeaways is that the pursuit of truth and understanding is a lifelong process. We're always learning and evolving. And it's important to stay open to new information and be willing to challenge what we believe.
Yeah, I like that. It's not about finding a definitive answer. It's about constantly questioning and seeking deeper understanding.
Exactly. And another takeaway is that spiritual organizations, like any institution, can be vulnerable to abuse and corruption.
Yeah, we need to remember that these power dynamics exist everywhere, and blind faith can be dangerous.
Absolutely. It's important to approach these spiritual leaders and organizations with a healthy dose of skepticism and to trust our own intuition.
And to remember that we always have the right to walk away from a situation that feels harmful or wrong.
Yeah, that's so important. No one should feel pressured to stay in a community or follow a leader if it's not serving them.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a lot of questions. How do we reconcile Siddhasvarupananda's teachings on renunciation
Right.
with his apparent wealth and influence?
That's something that each listener will have to consider on their own.
Yeah. And how do we make sense of these conflicting stories about Sif?
There are no easy answers, and I think that's okay. This deep dive wasn't about finding definitive conclusions, but rather about showing the complexities of this story.
And about getting people thinking about spirituality, leadership, and the potential for abuse
Right.
within organizations.
I think that's a good place to leave it for today. We've covered a lot.
Yeah, we have. And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep looking into this. Ask your own questions and come to your own conclusions.
And remember that searching for truth and understanding is an ongoing journey. You should never stop questioning, seeking, and growing.
Well said. Until next time, keep diving.
Yeah. It really is fascinating to see like how this all kind of plays out. We've gone from exploring the meaning of sannyasa to like uncovering these allegations. It's been quite the deep dive so far.
It really has been a journey, and I think that speaks to like the power of these kinds of stories. You know, they really challenge our assumptions.
Yeah.
Make us question what we thought we knew.
It's interesting because, we often think of spirituality as something pure,
Oh.
uplifting. But then you see these cases like with Siddhaswarupananda,
Yeah,
where those lines get blurred.
yeah. It's a good reminder that even within spirituality, you have complexities,
Yeah.
contradictions, and the potential for abuse.
Right.
It's important to approach it with open eyes and critical thinking.
Yeah, like you said earlier, we can't just blindly follow any leader
Right.
organization.
We-
We've got to
we-
do our own research and come to our own conclusions. Yeah, that's one of the most valuable things we can take away from this whole deep dive.
Mhm.
It's about empowering ourselves to be discerning, ask questions, and trust our own judgment.
It's kind of ironic that Siddhasvarupananda came from a tradition that emphasizes renunciation.
Right.
Yet he seemed to accumulate so much wealth.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of that?
Well, it's a paradox that's hard to reconcile.
Yeah.
Some people might argue that material success can be a byproduct of spiritual growth, but others would say it goes against everything that sannyasa is about.
It makes you wonder about the motivations behind some of his actions.
For sure, yeah. It's a question worth thinking about. What drives people to seek positions of spiritual authority? Is it purely to help others? Or is there sometimes some ego and ambition involved?
Yeah, tough questions to answer.
Yeah, it probably varies from person to person,
Right.
but it is a reminder to be cautious about putting anyone on a pedestal,
Yeah,
especially when it comes to faith and spirituality.
right. And to be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers or presents themselves as infallible.
True spiritual growth often comes from questioning, exploring, and discovering our own truth.
And from learning from a variety of sources,
Yeah.
not just relying on one person or group.
Exactly. It's about finding what resonates with us and using that to kind of create our own unique spiritual path.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are some final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I'd say remember that the pursuit of truth and meaning is a journey, not a destination. So keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and don't be afraid to challenge your own beliefs.
And when it comes to spiritual matters, always trust your intuition
Yes.
and seek guidance from a variety of sources. Don't just blindly follow anyone, no matter how charismatic or influential they may seem.
Well said. The power to discern and choose our own path is within each of us.
That's a great note to end on. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Siddhasvarupananda and Sif. It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking exploration, and we hope it's given you some things to think about as well.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.